All right, let's dive into something that I think a lot of us have felt, the social media trap. We're going to talk about why we feel so stuck with the big platforms and explore a really cool alternative. What if you could just build your own? Let's get into it.
This right here, this quote just hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? If you're a creator or trying to build a business online, you know this feeling. You pour everything, your time, your creativity, your money into these platforms, and they can just change the rules or flip a switch and poof, all that hard work is suddenly at risk.
So how did we get here? How did we get into this situation? Well, it all starts with this incredibly powerful, almost invisible force that keeps us all glued to just a few giant platforms. We can call it the social media lock-in. And the engine behind that lock-in is something called the network effect. It's a pretty simple idea, but man, its impact is huge. It's basically a feedback loop. The more people who join a platform, the more valuable and useful it becomes for everybody else.
I mean, just think about it for a second. Why are you on Instagram or Facebook? Probably because that's where your friends are. Why does a business open a page there? Because that's where the customers are. Every single person that joins adds a tiny bit more gravity, pulling more and more people in. It's a cycle that's really, really hard to break. And that leads to this big question from Geert Lovink. The whole promise of the internet was this open, free space, right? But here we are, over and over again, ending up in these privately owned, closed-off digital worlds. Why does this keep happening?
Well, being stuck in that lock-in has some serious consequences. And there's a great way to think about it using this analogy of living on leased land.
Okay, check this out because it lays it all out so clearly. When you're running, say, a Facebook group, you're on leased land. You're at the mercy of their algorithms, their rules on censorship, and all that data your community generates. That's their asset, not yours. But when you have your own platform, you're on owned land. You can talk to your people directly, you make the rules, and that data becomes your asset, growing in value over time.
So here's the bottom line, the most important takeaway. When you're building on one of the big social platforms, you're just a tenant. You're not the owner. You're basically building this beautiful house on someone else's property, and they can change the rent or even kick you out whenever they want.
Now, people have been trying to escape this trap for years. So let's talk about the first big idea for an escape route, decentralization, and maybe why it hasn't quite been the silver bullet everyone hoped for.
The promise of decentralization is amazing. You can't deny it. You get platforms like Mastodon, where there's no single company in charge. You get chronological feeds. What a concept. Not some algorithm deciding what you see. There's more privacy, more community control. It sounds like the perfect fix, right?
Well, maybe not so fast. This Reddit comment just cuts right through the noise. The hard truth is, most people value convenience way more than they value control. They want something slick, easy, and yeah, they want that little dopamine hit from the algorithm. The early decentralized platforms just felt kind of clunky and empty in comparison.
And that brings us right back to our old nemesis, the network effect. The biggest hurdle for any alternative isn't just having better tech or being more ethical. It's getting enough people to show up. If your friends aren't there, if your communities aren't there, it's just so hard to convince people to move. But this is where the story takes a really cool turn. A whole new idea is starting to bubble up. Instead of trying to build one giant replacement, what if we build millions of tiny, independent ones? This is the rise of the mini-socials. So instead of this massive David versus Goliath battle, what if the answer was way simpler? What if you could just create your own perfect little social network, just for your people, for your niche, a space that you actually truly control? And listen, this isn't just a nice thought. The data actually shows this works. When brands create their own communities on their own platforms, they're 16% more likely to build super intense brand loyalty. You're going from just shouting at people to actually building something with them. Okay, but this is the number that makes every founder and CEO sit up and pay attention. Companies that build these kinds of owned social platforms see their revenue go up, on average, by 2.8 times. That's not a small number. That is huge. So let's just completely reframe this whole conversation. Owning your community isn't just a defensive move to avoid getting kicked off a platform. No, it's an offensive strategy. It's about actively creating incredible value that you just literally cannot get when you're building on someone else's land. Okay, so this all sounds great in theory, but how do you actually pull it off? Let's get down to brass tacks and see how you can actually build your own community space.
Here's the absolute best part. The game has completely changed.
Because of this explosion of what we call low-code and no-code tools, all those huge barriers, the cost, the technical skills, they've basically crumbled. You do not need to be a developer to do this anymore.
You know, in the past, you'd have to go through all this complicated stuff. You'd have to install an operating system, set up a web server like Apache, figure out all the security. It was a whole thing. But what's different now is that tools automate all of this. For example, a tool like Linkspreed, which you can find on web4.community, does all of this for you in the background. It turns this massive tech project into a click of a button launch.
And what that automation really means is this incredible promise. You can build your very own social network in about 30 seconds, and you don't need to know a single line of code. This is what makes that whole mini socials idea a reality for basically anyone. So, I'll just leave you with this final thought. If the technology is no longer the problem, if you really could design and launch your own perfect social space in less than a minute, what would you build? What community would you bring together? For the first time in a long time, that power is finally shifting back to us, the creators.